Here's one for your 2026 bingo card, folks. Peter Jackson and his team are in talks with the Tolkien Estate about licensing the rights to movies beyond The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, namely Unfinished Tales and the Silmarillion. Jackson is back in Middle-earth for The Hunt for Gollum and the Stephen Colbert movie, but this is on a whole other level. For years, Tolkien's son Christopher stood firm. He openly hated Jackson's trilogy and refused to allow anyone to touch the books that he edited and released after the professor's passing. But of course, he's passed away himself a few years ago, and the younger generation of the estate have taken over and are more than happy to cash in, including making a deal with Amazon, which made them a pretty penny. As for Jackson and Warner Brothers, they have been hamstrung with only the movie rights to The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and the appendices in the back of Return of the King. This has severely limited future Middle-earth movies, as many of the legendary events from the First and Second Age are only mentioned within a few lines in the books, or are merely outlined in the appendices, whereas Tolkien went into much more detail within books that Warner Brothers are forbidden to touch. And that's why we're getting movies based on The Hunt for Gollum, or chapters that Jackson cut out, such as The Old Forest, Tom Bombadil, or The Barrow Downs. And even though I love the idea of seeing Sir Ian McKellen put on the pointy hat one last time, it for sure feels like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. And take Rings of Power as an example. Amazon are telling their own twisted tale of the Second Age of Middle-earth and the forging of the One Ring. Yet they only have access to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, including the appendices, which caused many issues as the majority of the source material comes from the Akalabeth section of the Silmarillion, or Unfinished Tales. But Amazon do have a special agreement with the estate where they can pitch ideas to be allowed to use elements from the books, such as when they were able to license the map of Numenor, or use certain names that are not mentioned within Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. So if Jackson and Warner Brothers can strike a deal with the estate, then expect more Middle-earth movies for the decades to come, possibly based on the Valar and the creation of Arda, the flight of the Noldor, Beren and Lúthien, the children of Húrin, the fall of Gondolin, the War of Wrath against the first Dark Lord Morgoth, and perhaps Jackson's own take on the Second Age. Obviously, let's not get too carried away yet, but I do think they will come to an agreement, as Warner Brothers have made it very clear they want to milk the Tolkien cash cow, as do the younger members of the family who now run the estate. And because Jackson has made this public, that could possibly sway them. And never say never nowadays, especially in Hollywood. These rights were off limits for years, but ever since Christopher Tolkien passed, the game has changed. No doubt this will divide the fan base. Some people will love the idea of more movies, whilst others just wish Jackson, Warner Brothers, or any other studio would leave well enough alone. More so after the Hobbit trilogy, Rings of Power, and recently the War of the Rohirrim. And if you think about it, every Middle-earth adaptation for both the big and small screen since Return of the King swept the Oscars over 20 years ago can be seen as anywhere from a disappointment to a disaster. And Jackson in 2026 isn't the same filmmaker he was in 2001, nor even the same one from 2012 who gave us the overblown CGI fest that was The Hobbit. He's even ruffled a few feathers recently with his take on AI. But it's clear he's more of the Middle-earth figurehead nowadays. He's not directing The Hunt for Gollum, nor do I think he will direct Stephen Colbert's film. He's basically the face of the studio now, is more involved in the business and technical side of the franchise, and he gets wheeled out for the press. His name was all over the War of the Rohirrim, but I doubt he was barely involved. And if that film is anything to go by, then we are more in our right to have our doubts. More so that the writers for The Hunt for Gollum are the very same ones who gave us Helm Hammerhand's daughter. And let's not forget, Hollywood has changed considerably since the trilogy. And I, for one, do not trust Warner Brothers or the vast majority of studios. And to be honest, the stories they have adapted in recent years are child's play in comparison to the ones from the Silmarillion. They used to say Lord of the Rings was unfilmable, but this is on a whole other level. The source material is more like the Bible or a text based in Greek mythology rather than a novel. Not to mention the stories focus on extremely overpowered and over-the-top characters. We aren't dealing with hobbits and mortal men, but super powerful elves who are able to go toe-to-toe with Balrogs. dragons the size of mountains, and of course the Valar, who are supernatural demigod-like figures. Personally, I've always been more interested in Jackson's version of the Second Age, in the same vein to his prologue from Fellowship of the Ring. The Second Age itself would still come with its own challenges, but compared to the First Age, or even earlier, then it would be a walk in the park. I am skeptical, but at the same time kinda glad they are thinking about branching out beyond making spin-offs to the trilogy. Obviously, if they do strike a deal, it's gonna be years before we see anything. Hunt for Gollum comes out next December. Colbert's film doesn't have a release date, but it's likely going to be another 2 or 3 years on top of that. And who knows what else they actually have lined up. That's if the audience are still invested in these films and the box office meets expectations. But let's just say they announce a deal at the end of the year. We're looking at another 5 or 10 years down the line. Jackson is 64, and I doubt he's going to be making films of this scale into his 70s. I'm sure he still has plans for a Tintin movie, and he spent a lot of time over the last few years on a Beatles and a First World War documentary, but I don't think he's directed a feature film since the Battle of the Five Armies in 2014, citing the loss of his long-term cinematographer Andrew Lesney as a major factor to why he's been on a hiatus. And I would not be surprised if his experiences directing The Hobbit also had a part to play in it. In my opinion, I don't think Jackson will ever direct a Middle-earth movie again. Instead, he will serve as producer and figurehead for the franchise. He passed the mantle to Andy Serkis for The Hunt for Gollum, and I expect he will follow suit for future endeavours, including the Colbert movie. He will personally handpick the director and be involved behind the scenes. But I don't expect him in the director's chair. He's made his money, got his Oscar, and changed the history of cinema forever. Obviously, the studio is only in it for the money. After all, it is a business. But I kind of feel Jackson does care. But perhaps, not being the young, ambitious filmmaker, facing a tight budget and tight schedule, and an interfering executive, means lightning won't strike twice. But at the same time, it feels like Middle-earth is now looking more like Star Wars or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or even your once beloved football club being taken over by a billionaire franchise. But I suppose only time will tell. So let's just say this deal does go ahead. Here's my prediction. They will make films based on Beren and Lúthien, maybe the Children of Húrin, and the Forging of the Rings and the Downfall of Númenor. Just don't make Galadriel the ultimate girl boss, Gandalf a hobo who comes to Middle-earth on a meteor and aged too soon, Sauron a simp, or try to force hobbits into the story. But guys, let me know your thoughts. Do you want Peter Jackson and his team to continue making Middle-earth movies? And even secure the rights to the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, and so on? Do you think Jackson's still the man to do this? Would you prefer a fresh hands on the project? Or after Rings of Power and the announcements for Hunt for Gollum and the Stephen Colbert movie, are you just done with adaptations from Middle-earth? Anyways guys, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.